It is now my pleasure to introduce our member, Roger Oglesby, who will introduce our main speaker. Roger.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the PI's one and only, Art Thiel.
I want to thank all of you, and I especially want to thank Roger for that introduction. I owe Roger a lot. As her colleague in Illinois did, our governor called Roger. And she asked Roger if he would do something about that damn Art Thiel and his sports editorials in the newspaper. And if Roger were to kind of go along with the deal, the state would take care of any financial woes that the PI may be feeling. But professional warrior that Roger is, he stood tall and said no deal to the governor. But sources have told me that the bidding had only reached $10, so when I was asked to speak to the Rotary, I had to ask a question: why? You want a guy to talk about local sports when you could cheer everybody up better if you wanted to say, bring a speaker here who would talk about 8 viaduct options, or maybe bring Tim Eyman to ask about his latest initiative to ban thinking by voters and taxpayers. How about a third campaign talk by Dino Rossi? But no, you want to hear about sports. Amazing. This is the only market in the country where readers turn from the sports section to the financial section for laughs. The Mariners were last in the American League. The Huskies were the worst football team in the college nation. The Seahawks aren't quite the worst team in the NFL, but they got 3 games to rally. And we lost the Sonics entirely, bamboozled by guys from Oklahoma. Imagine you're dancing with Kate Blanchett and she's swept out of your arms by Danny DeVito. Okay, maybe the Sonics were our ugly Bettys, you know. But at least we should have gotten back the Oklahoma football coach. Speaking of football coaches, the Huskies have a new coach. He's a young, likable, fast-talking guy from Los Angeles named Steve Sarkisian. He's worked most of his professional life for USC, just as did former University of Washington athletic director Barbara Hedges. Apparently, the UW is going to continue to go to the Trojan well until something good turns up. Perhaps if any University of Washington sports memorabilia is stolen in the next year or so, the USC might recommend somebody to go fetch it for them. It has been, as Roger mentioned, an absolutely terrible year with all sorts of turnover. And those of you who haven't followed it or kept track of it or have just given up on sports, I just wanted to run down the list of all the changes. It started a year ago November when the Storm's coach, Ann Donovan, quit unexpectedly and was succeeded by Ryan Agler, and the Storm, although they had a relatively successful regular season, did their traditional one and done in the playoffs. So that kind of set the tone. Shortly thereafter, Mike Holmgren announced he was going to resign after 10 years of what I think was great success in Seattle. And the team promptly fell off the edge of the earth. Even though Jim Mora is set to succeed, Jim Mora was being pulled by the University of Washington to come over and take over at Montlake. But he said, no, I'm paid much better to handle a much easier debacle. No, thank you. The Mariners went into the season with high expectations and were eliminated from any playoff contention by Memorial Day. That's become kind of a tradition here. And, of course, they fired not only the manager, Jim Riegelman, but Bill Bavasi, the general manager. And they replaced them recently with two people whose names I'm still working on and we'll get to here in a minute if I can muster the syllables. And then, of course, we saw with the Huskies just this week that they actually fired Ty Willingham, I don't know, 2 or 3 centuries ago, it seems like, and replaced him with Steve Sarkisian. I don't think that there's any worries about Ty Willingham. Not only is he going to get $1 million severance, he's also, I think, proven himself very qualified to run the Port of Seattle. So, people ask me, is there a connection between all of these things? Is something going wrong here? Is it the water? And it's really difficult to say because I'm sure you've heard this old saying that nature abhors a vacuum. Well, the media, we abhor coincidence. We have always got to try to make some connections between things and try to explain things. And I can tell you for a fact that this is utterly inexplicable. There is no connections between all of these. And the greater mystery, of course, what I was just about to ask our Seattle U friends here is, why would you want to join this mess? Stay nice and quiet up there on First Hill. Don't get in. In fact, I was just going to ask Bill Hogan, in my day, when I played a little college basketball, the official recruiting car of NCAA violations was a Trans Am. I have no idea what the official recruiting car is now for violations here, but you're going to find out very soon if you want to play this game. And the other high drama, I suppose, coming up would be another new sport coming to town. The Major League Soccer Sounders are going to start in March and have a season, an expansion season. And I'm just thinking, wait a minute, we're going to have Seattle U, which is basically going to be an expansion year this year and next year and next year and next year. Oh, okay. And then, of course, they're going to win the NCAA title because they'll have all those Trans Ams rolling up First Hill. And then the MLS wants to join this mess, and I'm not quite sure how this is all going to work out. I do take some heart, though, that out at the University of Washington, they've had very successful crew program. They've had a national championship won by the women's cross-country team recently, and they're, again, a national volleyball power. The women's tournament is this weekend, a regional tournament at the UW, and I think the UW would be favored to win and go on to pursue another title. And the great thing about those enterprises, they're not high profile. I don't think they're going to be 60,000 people out at Lincoln Park watching the women run through the park on a cross-country meet. But I guess the two major virtues there is that none of them are really a risk to shoot themselves in the thigh with their own gun, or are they likely to move to Oklahoma City? So I do encourage your support. I'm going to turn this over to questions here real quick. I just wanted to run over a few things about what's happening with the local enterprises, and I think starting with the Mariners, because their season has been over long enough that some of you have already forgotten it, and I think that's a very healthy sign. I think the Mariners actually have done a couple of good things. I like the new general manager, Jack Zarensik, and of course I can be bought pretty easily because all he has to do is return my phone call and I'm in his corner. Bill Bavasi didn't do that a lot. So I do like his openness, his candor, his resume, his experience, and the fact that as any of us in our 50s might be thinking about, hey, we're desperate and we're glad to have a job. So he was very eager to have this job, and he's approaching this with an energy and enthusiasm of a guy who's finally getting his big shot his big chance to do well. And I really do like how he's conducted himself. Now, again, if he re-signs Richie Sexson, forget everything I ever said. But I think he's got an eye for talent, and he appears to have the freedom to do whatever he wants with the roster. So that's kind of encouraging. And he made a hire that's really intriguing. Don Wakamatsu is the new Mariner manager. And again, he's real light on the resume because he's never been a major league manager before. And I think there has been the feedback that I've gotten from people who have been around him said it's amazing how identical it is to exactly what Washington was saying about Sarkisian. High energy, big passion, lots of a lot of charisma, lots of personal charm. And of course, none of that's going to be making any difference if they get out of playoff contention by Memorial Day again. But I do think that the Mariners, and this could be just simply the old bromide about, blind squirrels finding acorns. They actually made two good hires here. And I think one of the best things I heard from Zarensik was the fact that he's going to, he'd be willing to take a step back to take two steps ahead. And I think that is a great sign because the Mariners for these last several years have continued to try to win while contending. And I don't think you can do that unless you're the Yankees, who just spent $160 million this morning to sign CC Sabathia to a 7-year contract. The recession, obviously, word hasn't gotten to New York yet. So I think the Mariners really need to think about taking a year off from throwing a lot of foolish money at a lot of over-the-hill free agents. I know it's tempting, I know it's irresistible for them, but I do think this is time to invest in young people, invest in the talent they do have. I do think, for example, that Felix Hernandez and Eric Bedard, Ryan Rowland-Smith, and Brandon Morrow will make an excellent four-man rotation, but I don't think the offense is there to support it. And I think this fan base is probably smart enough and eager enough to indulge a slow year if the idea is contention for the next several years. Because with Jared Washburn, Carlos Silva, Richie Sexson, Jose Vidro, they invested in people heavily for a win now. And it just isn't going to work. We've seen around baseball teams like Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago White Sox, Houston Astros all come to great success by taking it in the chops for a few years and then growing with young people who aren't getting the big contracts. I think that's a possibility for the Mariners if they can resist the impulse. This is the greatest fan base, I think, for any Major League Baseball team. And I'm going to say you because I'm sure some of you have been there. If you went 2.3 million strong to last year, you will go to anything. That was a terrible team, and yet they still drew 2.3 million people. And that is remarkable. And I do owe a lot. My view is that that's a lot to do with the ballpark because, as you all know, and Rick Riz will tell you, it's the most beautiful ballpark in America. And it's unique, I think, because of where it is. We have the best summers anywhere. We have some of the worst winters, but they play baseball in the summer. And it's really a delightful place to go. The Mariners have carefully cultivated that fan-friendly approach where some of you may have experienced this. The ushers know you. They know your children's names. They keep the eye on the kids as they wander. And the kids treat it as South Center Mall or Northgate. In fact, I call it a mall park. These kids, if you stand in one spot on the concourse for 3 innings, you'll see the same group of kids coming around 2 or 3 times. It's just a fun place to be on a warm summer night in Seattle. I think there were 2 of them last year. And then even if you're single, it's also a great place because that restaurant out in right field, I don't know if many of you have been out there, it's the Hit It Here Cafe. And the singles crowd that they tell me that they call it the Hit On Me Cafe. And it's a great place for singles to meet, as is the Centerfield Plaza. So it's a social hub. It's not so much about baseball, but it's a great place to spend a Saturday night or any night in the summer. And that's why I've called the Mariners baseball's first idiot-proof franchise. They can do all kinds of things with that roster and have all kinds of losses, and we still go. So I don't have very much worries about the Mariners in terms of the recession or any other economic any consequence, because I really do think they've got a franchise that's just absolutely bulletproof and destined for a lot of success if they can stay out of their own way. And the Seahawks are actually similarly blessed, I think, with a great ownership, great management, and lousy players. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, and the first 2 will fix the last one. I don't think anyone anticipated this, least of all Mike Holmgren. If you've seen Mike's face lately, you can see it written large and deep. The Seahawks vastly overestimated their defense. They had a terrible run of injuries on offense, and the consequence is that a 2-11 season will be the worst. This will probably be a 2-14 season, which equals the worst in franchise history, be the worst in Mike Holmgren's coaching history. And I keep thinking, Mike says, I don't want to go out like this. But I don't know that there's anything to be changed about that. I think Tim Ruskell, who is the general manager, president of football operations, wants a defensive coach, and he's got one in Jim Mora, and I think the remake of the Seahawks is underway. They fell off the edge of the earth like I would never have anticipated, and so I'm really expecting massive changes. And I don't think Mike's going to want to come back, but I do think he probably likes one of those cushy network TV analyst jobs, which we'd all should aspire to, because if you can just string 3 cliches together at once, you can get $600,000 a year. It's a tremendous gig. So, and then at the University of Washington, who is that's the subject du jour, I guess, this week. And I do like the new coach, Sarkisian, because from the standpoint of the whole energy idea, but I am already tired of the word passion. They have really drummed this home to try to excite the fan base, and the University of Washington, I don't think, appreciates the depth of the ditch they got themselves in. In the 15 years since Don James retired, they've gone through, if I've got my math right, 4 presidents, 4 athletic directors, and Sarkisian is the 5th coach in 12 years. That's a lot of churn, and it doesn't bode well for a program that's trying to, all they're trying to do is find their balance, find their equilibrium. And what I'm most concerned about is the fan base isn't going to be very patient with a coach who's got a steep learning curve. He has not been a head coach anywhere doing anything. He's never hired anybody. And that is a bit of a trick when you're starting out. He went from assistant coach with no head coaching experience to a BCS program with some history and tradition. Big, big leap. And I was watching that event. I don't know how many of you saw that on television. I was there for the introductory press conference. They had the band. They had the cheerleaders. They had guys with their shirts off with the word SARK written across their chest. And I'm thinking, what do these people know that I don't about why are they doing this? And because it's just such an unknowable thing. I wrote this in my column on Tuesday that I talked to Ron Crockett of Emerald Downs. He's been a big booster in the power behind the throne at UW Athletics for years. I said, Ron, what do you think? And he says, yeah, nice young guy, but who knows with these guys? And it's true. It is unknowable about how an individual, because I quoted also in the column Jim Mora, who 4 years ago was the Atlanta Falcons head coach, and he just gushed about how wonderful Tyrone Willingham was. Oops. It's just a very difficult and unpredictable deal, and as our Seattle University brethren here are going to find out, it's so unpredictable about the outside forces that come into play in a major collegiate enterprise, whether it's whether it's academic requirements, whether it's civil behavior, whether it's the economic pressures that land on a program. It's a very, very difficult enterprise to manage this day and age. And once you get behind, it's hard to catch up. That's the university's biggest problem, because in the NFL, when you get behind, they give you the first-round draft choice at the top. You can get well quickly that way, but when you're at the bottom of the NCAA, you keep getting worse. You keep having to change coaches. You keep having to turn things over. You keep having to try to appeal to your fan base by saying, yes, we know what we're doing, so we're going to fire the coach, which is often exactly the opposite thing to do. You have to display a lot of patience and a lot of courage in the face of trying to work in a nation that is all about instant gratification, at least when it comes to sports. And that's probably as much as we may lament our team's management, we have to sort of fall back on ourselves, and I would include the media as part of this. We really want our teams to win. We want to win now, and we have no tolerance for a patient year, a patient 2 years. And it's really acute at the college level, because the colleges have two missions: to educate the student and to win. And Father Sundborg and I have had this conversation about the difficult management issue that involved. It's very difficult. Some schools do it. It's not impossible. But it really does take a lot of attention to detail, a lot of very sharp-eyed management, because the coaches want to win. And it's in their nature to cut a corner, to find a shortcut, because the urgency to fill that stadium or that basketball arena is relentless. And so that's why the twin missions often collide at a university level. And it's been a very, very difficult road for Washington, because that's really what's caused a lot of the turnover. There is the pressure to win, and it's also a large issue, the pressure to supervise. I remember writing when Rick Neuheisel first got here, my first column was, this guy is going to talk his way out of this job. And sure enough. The problem is that Rick needed to be told no by Barbara Hedges. It didn't happen very much, because she trusted Rick to know what he was doing. And on his first weekend, Rick committed several NCAA secondary recruiting violations. Not a good start. They're watching Sarkisian like a hawk out there. They don't want to have any repeat of that. And in fact, what Rick did was probably the biggest motivation for hiring Tyrone Willingham. Tyrone Willingham was the straightest arrow in NCAA football. There has never been a hint of NCAA recruiting violations, never been any problems with conduct. And unfortunately, the people at Notre Dame said, this man, he said, he's a great coach Monday through Friday, Saturday not so good. And that sort of seemed to be the case. When you're 0-12, you can't be so good on Saturdays. So I think that issue still haunts, or it did haunt Washington upon Willingham's hire. They're trying to come to that great narrow middle ground in college sports out there, where you actually adhere to the university's academic mission while conducting a sports program that has a lot of wins. And they've certainly done it in the non-revenue sports. As I mentioned earlier, cross-country, volleyball, crew, they've done better than they ever have before in the non-revenue sports. But the big dog is the one that carries all of them, and that's football. And that's why I'm sure that some of you were aghast that the salary for Sarkisian is $1.75 million to start with no experience. I don't want to even get into when I was a grocery bagger and starting out with no experience, but $1.25 an hour. But that is the market, and the university chose to play in it. I talked to former Governor Dan Evans, who's been a real driver in the stadium renovation campaign, and I discussed with him these issues, and he said, how do we jump off the train? And I had no answer. There is no answer for, if you're in BCS, and by the way, if you don't follow that, that's the bowl championship series is how the college football conducts its championship, even though it's neither a championship series or near a championship or a series. It's just a way for the universities to make a whole lot more money by fooling people that there is a championship here somewhere. It's a beauty pageant. People vote, people campaign for votes. It has nothing to do with the action on the field, but don't get me started on that or we'll be here till 2 o'clock. The point being that the university athletic program is really in a difficult situation because the football program has to fund everything. University of Washington is one of the few programs in the country, I think there's like 10 or 15, that has a self-sustaining athletic budget. In other words, no tax dollars go to running the athletic department. And that's a point of pride. I think it's a great way to go if a university can do it, but it's really hard. And that's why the university is now about to ask the state legislature for $150 million to fix up Husky Stadium. And I think they've got a decent enough argument, but I certainly wouldn't want to be going to Olympia, which is faced with a billion dollar budget deficit, and say, we got a sports problem in Seattle and we got to fix it. They're going to get as far as Clay Bennett did, which is nowhere. And that's really, it's kind of almost I hate to use perfect storm since that's a cliche, but it is for Washington to make this ask at this time. And even though they may have a pretty good argument about that, I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Husky Stadium when it's empty. Actually, probably all of you have this year. But it's really in bad shape. Concrete's cracked. Electrical wiring is hanging down. I remember once walking in there with sunglasses in the press box, and I turned my head, and the loose conduit came down and hooked my glasses and threw them off onto the floor. I'm saying, I don't think this is code. I'm not an expert on it, but it's just amazing how decrepit that place is. They do need a fix. Some of those planks that you're sitting on there were original in 1920. The only thing older in the state is the ferry system. And as a ferry user, I don't want to see Husky Stadium fixed before they get a boat that was built sometime after 1960. So anyway, it's a difficult enterprise that the university has found itself in, and I don't know that it's going to be resolved anytime soon. I do want to give the last 10 minutes to you for questions. I want to hear what you have to say about anything I've said or something that I haven't covered about this, about newspapering, about any number of things that we can touch on in 10 minutes. Yes, sir?
Here's a microphone.
Oh, okay, and there's a microphone coming to the questioners.
Well done to Seattle Pacific University's women's soccer team for winning
Yes.
the NCAA Division II. My question is, given the economic transformation we may be seeing, not just a downturn, but a fundamental reshifting of priorities, what impact do you think this changing landscape may have at sports across all levels?
Well, that's really a difficult question to say at the outset of what is apparently going to be a calamity. But history does say that sports tends to be almost as recession-proof as the rest of the entertainment industry. In the Depression of the 1930s, baseball, boxing, horse racing flourished. The story of Seabiscuit, if you happen to have read the book or seen the movie, was a story about a sport and an animal that became an absolutely heroic figure that people really had an emotional need to bond with. And baseball flourished then. Other sports at the time flourished because it was an escape. It was a distraction. It was something other than concentrating on their own misery. We may be looking at something like that in the next year or two. So I think sports does have a little more traction, but we're already seeing some of the fallout. We're seeing sponsors pull out of the Super Bowl advertising, pull out of the Super Bowl. Johnson & Johnson, a very major big pharma company, pulled out of the Olympic sponsorship. The budgets for the impending two Olympics, Vancouver in 2010 and London in 2012, are already peeling back, way back on the extravaganza elements of their programs. You'll never see anything like we saw in China this year in the next two Olympics. And as far as the overall impact, I think people are going to be very, very careful with their spending dollars, and that's going to limit suites, season ticket sales of the major sports. I think Major League Soccer coming to Seattle with its lower prices, I think Seattle University coming in with lower prices are going to be a more affordable sports entertainment option, and probably are in a position to stay steady or even take advantage of a situation where people are going to peel away from the big sports just out of common sense rationality. So, but there are multiple outcomes. Other questions? Yeah.
Sunta?
Hi, Art. I remember the last time you came over to talk to us, you were saying that Bennett won't move the Sonics out of the Seattle market to Oklahoma because Oklahoma basketball market is much smaller compared to Seattle. So you were wrong.
Thank you very much.
So can you comment on that? Second question. I've been sitting here during the whole program, and you did such a great job mentioning all the male sports. You have not mentioned any female.
You were wrong.
Okay. All right. So I want you to tell us, so I was wrong, the second one. So can you tell us which female sport team would do well in 2009?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the UW women's volleyball team is going to, I think they've got a real good shot for the title. I think the Storm are not going to be very good because I think Lauren Jackson may not be back because she's had to play 10,000 games in her career because that's how you make money. And I think it's going to be very difficult for her to return. And I think the other thing to watch, and this is nobody pays attention to this, but it's going to be fantastic. University of Washington track team with its young women running distances is going to be a national powerhouse. And it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, to keep track of them. And as far as Clay Bennett goes, if I had any idea that Mayor Nichols had no courage when he was in the trial, I would have, I would have probably said, well, yeah, they're going to go. But the university, but Seattle, decided at the last minute to cave to the temptation of getting $45 million and paying off the debt, when I think they had a case to win. And I do think that there were people in this market, starting with Steve Ballmer, who want and still want to invest in Key Arena to bring back another pro sports team. I don't think that's going to happen right now because the city is going to be in the same spot as the University of Washington. And going to the legislature this year to try to get some tax diverted from the hotel tax to supplement the private investment in Key Arena. They need $75 million to complete a package of a $300 million remodel for Key Arena, and I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not sure Seattle wants to invest or should invest in another building that's 46 years old. We have gotten our nickel out of the Coliseum/Key Arena, and if there's ever going to be another pro basketball team here or pro hockey team, it's going to be based on a privately funded arena that should have no tax money other than perhaps some land acquisition to it. And I think there are a lot of people in this town who would like to see that happen. But with this recession, with an unknown future, when that's going to end, I don't see that happening anytime in a reasonable next couple of years.
So wants to recruit you to the Asian Weekly.
Really?
Yes.
Given how things are going in Seattle newspapering, I'll take her up on that.
I don't think it was sufficiently publicized, but Navy beat Army this last weekend. 34-0, the 7th straight year they beat Army. Do you think Army will ever have a chance?
Well, I'll just say this. If President-elect Obama keeps his promise, they're going to have a whole lot more people back here to play well in that matchup. Let's hope that happens. Other questions?
Did the Mariners shake-up go high enough?
Will they or did they?
Did they go high enough? Did they go high enough in shaking up the management?
Oh, I see. No. I'm incurred the wrath of the senior management of the Mariners by suggesting there needed to be a change with CEO Howard Lincoln and President Chuck Armstrong, because in case you noticed, it hasn't been working the last half dozen years or so. And give Howard credit. He was willing to sit with me and talk about all the issues that he had, and answered in a very extensive question and answer session that we had in October in the PI. And I think the issue remains that there is some upper management interference with some of the Japanese players, because the owner in Japan takes a proprietary interest in their welfare and well-being. And in the case of Kenji Jojima, I think it went counter to what was best for the team. When they gave him a long-term contract extension, it stymied a lot of things that the Mariners might have done with their roster and personnel. I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world, and it's something that's workable, but I think that you can't have, at a professional level, any other agenda but winning. And I think the Mariners' agenda got a little bit confused with that call. But on the other hand, as Howard Lincoln said, they did pretty well bringing Ichiro here, and Kazuo Sasaki before that. And so I think there is, the pipeline has been a help, but it hasn't been 100% help. I think Lincoln and Armstrong did well with these two new hires. And again, I'm sure Asunta will be here to call me out if I'm wrong in June. So but at least that whiff is going to take a couple, 3 years to prove, and by then you'll all have forgotten. So, okay.
With all due respect to the Admiral, I would remind each one of us within the sound of my voice, for the past 5 or 6 years, the Army has been busy doing other things on our behalf.
We have time for one more.
A bowl playoff. Do you have any feelings about the college bowl playoff?
I agree entirely with our president-elect. An 8-team, 3-game playoff is entirely warranted. I don't understand how college football has allowed its premier event and its big fundraiser to be a beauty pageant. And when you're asking sports writers their opinion about who should win and who should be in the BCS title game, you're in for a mistake-prone event. And so I really do think that it's well overdue for a playoff. So I think my time is just about up, and I wanted to say one thing. I understand this is Rotary's 100th year. Well, I have a great idea to celebrate 100 years of Rotary, as well as 100 years of Seattle sports. Next April, a book is going to be out, co-authored by my friend Steve Rudman at the PI, KJR host Mike Gastineau. The Great Book of Seattle Sports Lists. It's a compendium of Seattle sports history, oddities, strange stuff, and the 100 best athletes in the state sports history. That'll be coming out in April. I'll be happy to sign an autograph when you invite me back next time. And if you have graduation, Father's Day, great idea to come up with that. And then you won't even have to pay me lunch next time, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. How many of you have ever dreamed of being a super athlete? You've imagined the roar of an adoring admirers as you made that winning touchdown or you dunked that impossible basket as the buzzer just sounded. And within the time frame of a game, you demonstrated your skill, your tremendous savvy, and Herculean stamina. Well, you can make your dreams come true, and you can become an absolute hero. And it will feel really good. But your fans may be a little different. They might not be able to afford a ticket to a game, and their thoughts may be focused more on hunger or on a shelter rather than a championship. This is a time of year when our community is in need, And it's also a time when our country needs your support because of the financial crisis. So be generous at this year end and lend your treasure, your talent, and your time. Think about the Seattle Rotary Service Foundation. Think about the Rotary Boys and Girls Club, Family Services, First Harvest, and all of the other amazing organizations in our community that provide a safety net. And I don't know of one of those organizations that doesn't need your help now and throughout the year. So you too can be a superhero. You may not hear the roar of your fans, but you will understand the unspoken word of a grateful family or individual. You may not have your accomplishments written in Art's column, but you will know that they're real and that you have made a difference. Also share your deeds of kindness so that others can be inspired by them and do the same. I personally believe that speed and athletic prowess are just plain overrated. It's been my personal experience that it often leads to sore muscles, fatigue, and even injury. But I can also tell you, there is no strain in being generous. Thanks today to all of our program participants. A special welcome to Kevin Baker and Jane Pryor. Next week, December 17th, we are at the Sheraton. Please arrive early. It's our Christmas program. 11 o'clock is the reception with eggnog, punch, and a no-host bar. You will also hear Rotarian carolers in the foyer. Lunch will be earlier than usual. It will be served at 11:45. And the Fifth Avenue production, Swingin' on a Star, the music of Bing Crosby, will entertain us all. So buy those tickets as you leave today. We will see you next week. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.